Okay, you want to franchise your business. What should you do first? In some of the points I raised this morning about being ready to franchise, I raised a few checkpoints. So assuming you're still good to go, you're now thinking of what practical steps to do first. This is designed to get you thinking. Bear in mind, though, what we can cover in a 20-minute presentation is very different to what the reality is, because it takes us about 8 weeks to set up a franchise system. So I can only really give you a bit of a fly past, but hopefully I'll be able to give you some valuable pointers to start you off. This graphic will become more evident as I go through this slide. Now let's go back to the beginning and consider your intellectual property again. If you don't already have a registered trademark, then just crack on and get that done. You can do it yourself, or you can hire a professional to do it for you. But the DIY route is quite straightforward, and actually the IPO are very helpful. But if you get lost, or you just prefer somebody with a bit more experience to do it, then contact us or your preferred solicitor. Bear in mind that if you want protection beyond the UK, then there's other fees to pay to other organisations in Europe and further afield. Now go on and gather up all the bits of IP that relate to your brand. Some examples of things like domain names and social media profiles. If you're an established firm, then review any historical elements that might need renewing. Trademarks do expire. You just need to keep them in your ownership. So now's a great time to do a bit of a spring clean on things like this. Now, if you know a good franchise consultant, they will physically do this for you anyway. We would always say adopt a non-disclosure policy. It's a very big issue. If you knew what I knew, you'd be a bit paranoid. I know of several firms, well-funded individuals who are essentially roaming the internet, and any trade shows their only reason for being there is to copy somebody else's new franchise idea. They may well contact you, pretend to be interested, maybe ask some direct questions, potentially even go and see you at your head office. But there'll be people who are not actually interested in franchising with you. So get everyone to sign an NDA and get that in place right away. Don't think either that you'll be immune from someone copying because you've had several years in the industry and you'll think that somebody else would need to have several years in the industry. I certainly wouldn't blame you for thinking that, but consider this. What matters as a franchisor is franchising expertise, not trade secrets. Those trade secrets can be acquired. Someone like me, for example, I could do a joint venture with one of your direct competitors. And my franchise knowledge is what will put 100 branches on, not their trade secrets. I can even buy that knowledge in, recruit previous staff or senior executives, head on anybody, basically. So for what it's worth, adopt a non-disclosure policy. They aren't the stickiest of legal agreements, but it will tell you something if someone is reluctant to sign one. And that's one of the signs that you're looking for. Finally, I'd get everyone to sign an NDA. Your banker, your lawyer, your staff, me, everyone. It's good business practice. Okay, so in terms of what to do next, well, in no particular order, here's a glimpse of what a franchise consultant typically concerns themselves with. Just move my picture down there out of the way. Now, when you launch your franchise, you really need to be sure of what other franchisers one of your potential franchisees might consider. So benchmark what you're offering against sector norms or direct competitors. It takes a fair while to put it all together, but what you build into your system must take account of what else is out there. It doesn't mean you're going to copy anything. It just means you're going to consider why someone else would go with you rather than them. And we're aware of direct competitors in materially the same industry who have very significant differences between them, and those differences are not lost on franchisees. Now, there's a decision to be made on what type of franchise you're going to sell. So as we move down this left-hand column, you need to decide, are you just looking for single owner, single franchisees, or multi-unit owners, or masters, or area developers? There are a number of different types of franchise, and we're happy to explain all those to you. But and that would be a 20-minute session on its own. But then once you've done that, you then also need to decide what's included and what isn't included as well, actually, because what is included will determine the initial franchise fee, and what isn't included will determine the total investment. And deciding what is in and what is out is something that requires a bit of careful thought. Financially, how is the franchise going to be pitched? How will it be funded? These days, lots of franchises can be funded by the government startup loan scheme, as well as high street banks. But actually, a lot of franchises are still acquired through personal loans or even their own funds. So either way, these are conversations that you're going to have with franchise investors. So your preferences and direction to them needs to be established now. Moving to the right-hand column, you're going to need to create an operational manual, because it's part of the actual franchise agreement that each franchisee carries on their business in a consistent manner with the operational manual. It takes longer than you think, and it needs to cover everything that a franchisee does, and it should be in a certain format. It's quite a hefty document, but that manual and the franchise agreement legals together are the basis of your controls on a franchisee's activity. Now, speaking of the agreement, whatever you do, don't feel it's a triumph if you happen to find one online. It may well turn out to be the opposite of a triumph, whatever that is. But your franchise agreement, like everything else, needs to be done properly, not cobbled together. And the Law Society have precedent agreements that lawyers use. And you can reasonably expect that any potential franchise buyers you meet will take their own professional advice. And if that lawyer says it's a complete joke of an agreement, well, you're going to lose franchise sales as fast as inquiries come in. So it needs to be current and appropriate. Then you've got various other points in this right-hand column which all need further thought. As I mentioned on that headline there, you really look at 40 different modules, and all of them matter. These are some key ones, but they all matter. And sadly, it's not really a case where if you know a bit about one of them, then you can do that in-house and maybe farm out the decision to somebody else with franchise knowledge, because a lot of these considerations don't work in isolation. They link together. For example, any decision on territorial rights is as much a potential income decision for a franchisee as it is a territory decision. A smaller, concise trading region limits the financial potential, as does the level of royalty and other fees. So as does the type of franchise being offered, actually, single or multi-unit. So they all affect each other to a greater or lesser degree. And so when setting up a new franchise system, you need an experienced eye to consider this and how they're all going to slot together. Either way, we would allow about 8 weeks typically to do the whole thing. 8 weeks. Okay, so recruiting, training, and supporting franchisees. This is a big topic, and it's amazing how many franchisors make a right mess of this, really. It should be a relatively simple task. Now, firstly, unless you're lucky enough to know where all your potential franchisees are hanging out, and then you're going to need to spend some time and money on marketing. Now, there's a bewildering set of options here for you to consider. You can certainly spend a fortune. And the franchise media is an interesting bunch. Some are really brilliant, some are truly tragic, but they'll all tell you they can deliver franchise leads for you. Our Line Licensing Group, to give you an idea, currently manages the responses from about 400 odd adverts per month. It's at least that, probably more, probably a good deal more than that actually, but it's at least 400. So indirectly, we're spending eye-watering amounts of money on marketing across the 40 or so franchise brands that we manage. So I can tell you with some certainty that some marketing works and some marketing doesn't work, and there is no direct link between the cost of marketing and how good it is. So that's probably where a consultant earns a lot of their fee, actually, because there is significant money that can be wasted. But to recruit franchisees, you need to get your franchise out there in full view. By way of example, the leading franchise portals will grant you, so not grant you, they will want a grand or two off you for a reasonable 3-month campaign, I would think. Now that picture there is an example of Lime Licensing Group's exhibition stand. It's 4 by 3 meters, and I suppose really quite small, I guess, for exhibition standards, but it still costs about four grand or so. And that's without the cost of the panels and the lights. And it shows you've got hotels and a considerable spend on alcohol potentially to include too. So shows are not inexpensive. Magazines are usually a good read, and some bring in leads and some are literally useless at lead generation. Navigating your way through all of this is what consultants do a lot of. You can easily burn through 10 grand just like that with very careful planning and a slightly slower approach. You could do that. You could halve that. I've personally spent 50 grand on a single show in the past, and that was at Olympia. So you've got to put some budget to it. Either way, each franchisee will cost several £1,000s in pure marketing costs. Our best results were recruiting 40 franchisees at an average marketing expense per franchisee of about 700 quid, and the most expensive probably around 7 grand per franchisee. So you'll be somewhere between the two, I would think. Now, as leads come in, they need careful handling. You're not selling double glazing, so you can dismiss all those sales books you've read about sharp angle closers and things like that. It's still a sales process, but what matters is appointing the right type of franchise owner. Now, all the best franchisors find it easy to say no to a fat check from the wrong applicant. You'll get that check from someone else, and you just have to be patient, wait for the right applicant. My first foray into franchising through the 90s, it took us 10 years to grow the franchise networks that we had to 167 franchise agreements in place. That's 10 years. But it suited us to onboard only 1 or 2 each month, roughly. And we turned down a lot of people along the way, but our patience was well rewarded with really quite a lot of franchise agreements in place, looking back. 1 good franchisee is better than 5 bad ones. So, if your brand's good enough, you don't need to have a network of drifters and bring them on as fast as possible. You can build with great people, and if you do that, you'll likely achieve more with fewer people anyway. And when it comes to training franchisees, whatever time and resource you put into that is usually well rewarded. Your training should equip every franchisee with the skills and knowledge that they need when you're not with them. And then when they're underway, you need to be available. Now, you'll probably know the best format for training any newbies already, but you could consider a few things like this. A mix of classroom and practical training delivered by you, and then maybe some accompaniment with existing franchisees once you've got them. And also don't overlook including suppliers in training either. If you have a hands-on business with a piece of machinery, for example, then get a supplier on board to deliver a session on that machine. They're helping themselves by training your franchisees anyway. Ongoing training and ongoing support, I would say, are almost the same thing, because it's your role to always be teaching best practice. The training side of that should be self-evident. The support side, maybe only if you're providing things on behalf of franchisees that support their activities. Now, some franchisees will be very successful. Some will disappoint you and therefore probably themselves too, if they're honest. So you or your team need to be able to put the appropriate support in, tailored to each franchise owner. The guys at the top of the league table need a very different approach to the strugglers at the bottom. Okay, let me show you this graph. Now, I first saw this graph, I bet it was 2 decades ago, and it's still very appropriate today. And it's actually just as good for a new franchisor as it is for a new franchisee. So let me orientate you around it. Now this is really from a franchisee's perspective, but bear in mind you'll follow this graph just the same as a new franchisor when you start your franchise journey. Now that left-hand vertical axis shows a state of mind, happy, okay, or sad. Franchisees begin life very dependent upon their franchisors, and they're happy. It's a new business venture that's full of hope and excitement, just as it is for you as a new franchisor, actually. And the green line maps that joyous moment. So up on the top left there, relatively short period of time in, everybody's happy. Now, the bottom horizontal axis shows a timescale. Now, don't worry about the actual timescale. Yours might be longer or shorter, but the principle is the same. The curve shows dependence upon each other. So when a franchisee launches, they begin life very dependent. And then as reality bites and hard yards are done, just as with all new businesses, things get a little tougher, and that leads to a decline in that honeymoon feeling, but they're okay, usually. Somewhere near the downward curve, franchisees start to feel independent and maybe question why things are done a certain way even. Some think they know it all. As a franchisor, you too may start to worry that franchising wasn't quite what you thought it was. And this is particularly true if you didn't follow my advice in the earlier presentation about recruiting the right caliber of franchisee. Your graph will look a lot more severe than this, but I did warn you. Now, as time moves on a little further, and a few light bulb moments occur where franchisees really start to get it, and they understand more about what is required. They appreciate why things are done a certain way and realize that they are with their franchisor and they're interdependent. So the franchisee is stuck to the task, and as time's moved on, they've actually got themselves to a position now where the business is working, and they sort of bobble around a bit between the happy and the okay bit, and maybe just here and there a little sad when things go wrong, as they often do, same as any other business. What I'd like to say to you, though, is actually it's the same for a new franchisor. You know, as time moves on, the network settles down, you have your successes and your disappointments, and problems are dealt with. And one day most new franchisors realize that actually they've done pretty well with it, and everything's okay and doing all right, and it's working, and so they are bobbling around in that happy and okay area. But dare I say it too, that many of the things that franchisors heard or have been taught by franchise consultants come home to roost as time moves on. And those tangible things that the consultant built in at the launch of the actual franchise have proved to be very valuable and have mitigated any issues that crop up. But most new franchisors have their happy, okay, and sad moments too. But as Dolly Parton said, I never promised you a rose garden. So with all that in mind, let me just get a little summary about becoming a franchisor. Okay, franchising a business is often more profitable than the business itself. Now, could your one become 2 or 10 or 50? Yes, it could, but others have. So why not you? No reason why not. Some have failed, of course, but usually there are reasons why that is evident. Franchising is easy to get right, it's easy to get wrong, just depends what you know. The good news is, from your point of view, is that there's no legal registrations or anything like that. We could literally go down the pub this evening, dream up a new venture, and I could franchise it tomorrow. It wouldn't be successful. It's a sad truth, however, there is actually no one to stop us doing exactly that. Now, because of this, and to a greater or lesser extent, we see a lot of ill-thought franchises that are launched. And so too do all of those potential franchisees that are out there. They see one rubbish franchise opportunity after another, and then they come across a strong brand that's launching a well-thought-through franchise opportunity, one that has a franchise specialist on board, that has a proper franchise agreement done just right, and maybe a direct pathway laid out to help them to fund their franchise purchase. Everything just stacks up, very professional, all done correctly. You know, these are the brands that are selling the most franchises. So if you have an already successful business model, there's nothing to stop you considering franchising. 3 golden rules, there are plenty more, but let's just make it simple to end this presentation. 3 golden rules. You can only franchise an already profitable business model and consider if it's still profitable after a franchisee's costs. Invest in a professional setup, just as you would expect your franchisees to invest with you, and accept the commercial risk you are taking. And when you franchise your own business, it's almost like a new business launch all over again. It makes sense for you to identify your maximum liability in pounds terms and in time terms, maybe reputational terms too. Once you're happy with that, then put the resources in place, fully commit to it, because really a franchise launch, there's no place for a toe in the water approach. It needs commitment and determination that you're going to do it, you're going to fund it properly, get everything in place to do it correctly, and they're the brands that are selling franchises. Now, if you want, Lime Licensing Group will give you a free feasibility assessment. There are no catches. Just contact either myself or any of the directors at Lime Licensing Group. They're on our website, and probably one relatively close to you. And we'll help you to explore it, and we won't charge you. So take advantage of that, and then before you incur any expense or further time, we might be able to help you. Well, that's the end of this presentation. So hey, I hope to see you in franchise land.